The road into Black Hollow narrowed the deeper Daniel Mercer drove. Pines closed in on both sides, their branches knitting together overhead until the sky became a thin gray seam. The GPS signal had vanished 10 miles back, leaving only a paper map folded on the passenger seat and Clara's quiet breathing beside him. Neither of them spoke when the first dead animal appeared in the road. It was a deer, no visible wounds, no blood, just lying there stiff, eyes open, as if it had stopped mid-step and never resumed. Daniel swerved around it. Clara kept her camera resting on her lap, lens cap still on. "You feel that?" she asked softly. "Feel what?" "Like we crossed something." He didn't answer. He had felt it too. A subtle pressure change in his ears, like descending in an airplane. The air outside seemed thicker somehow, heavier. Black Hollow did not appear the way most towns do. There was no welcoming sign, no gas station at the edge, no scattered houses gradually increasing in number. The forest simply broke open into a small clearing, and there it was. A collection of aging wooden buildings arranged around a silent main street. Windows boarded, paint peeled, no cars, no people. It did not look abandoned in the chaotic way ghost towns often do. It looked paused, as if everyone had stepped out for a moment and never returned. Daniel parked near what used to be a general store. The sign above the door hung crooked, swaying slightly though there was no wind. Clara stepped out first. The sound of her boots on gravel echoed too loudly. "There should at least be birds," she murmured. There were none. The Whitmore house stood at the far end of town, slightly elevated on a hill beyond the other buildings. Larger than the rest, darker too, though the sky was evenly overcast. They drove the remaining distance in silence. Up close, the house looked less like a home and more like something that had grown from the earth. The wood siding had darkened almost black with age. Windows stared outward, glass dull and opaque. The front door was slightly ajar. Daniel killed the engine. The silence that followed felt immediate and intentional. "You still want to do this?" he asked. Clara met his eyes. There was no thrill there, no reckless excitement, just resolve. "We came for answers." The front steps groaned under their weight. The door opened fully with barely a push, as though the house had been waiting. Inside, the air was stale but not rotten. No thick mold smell, no decay, just old dust and something faintly sweet beneath it. The foyer opened into a wide living room with a staircase rising along the far wall. Furniture remained where it had been left decades ago. A couch, a coffee table, a standing lamp unplugged and coated in gray. Daniel walked slowly, each step stirring soft clouds of dust that glittered in the dim light. "It's too intact," Clara whispered. He knew what she meant. Abandoned houses collapse inward over time. They rot, they sag, they show violence from nature reclaiming them. This house had simply stopped. Clara set up her camera near the staircase. "Margaret Whitmore claimed her son stopped sleeping," she said quietly, reviewing notes on her phone. "Said he talked to someone in the walls. Said he wasn't alone." Daniel glanced toward the hallway beyond the living room. "And then?" "She locked him in the nursery one night." The air shifted. Daniel felt it, subtle but unmistakable. A temperature drop of just a few degrees. Clara continued. Neighbors reported hearing her screaming the next morning. When authorities arrived, she was sitting in the nursery rocking chair. The crib was empty. And the boy? Never found. Silence returned. A deep, pressing silence. Daniel walked toward the staircase. The wood creaked beneath him, each sound amplified in the stillness. Halfway up, he paused. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath. The second-floor hallway stretched long and narrow. At the very end stood a door slightly open. The nursery. Clara joined him at the top step. "Do you hear that?" she asked. At first, he didn't. Then he did. A faint rhythmic sound. Soft. Measured. Breathing. Not theirs. The air felt colder near the hallway's center. Daniel raised his flashlight and aimed it down the corridor. The beam flickered once. Twice. Then steadied. The breathing stopped. Just like that. They stood frozen. Then, from inside the nursery, came the sound of a rocking chair creaking slowly back and forth. Daniel's throat tightened. "There's no wind." Clara swallowed. "We need to see it." They moved together. Each step down the hallway felt heavier than the last, as if gravity subtly increased with every inch closer to the open door. The rocking grew louder, steady, unhurried. Daniel reached the doorway first and pushed it open. The nursery was small, pale wallpaper peeled in thin strips. A cracked wooden crib sat against the far wall. Beside it, a rocking chair moved gently on its own. Back and forth, back and forth. No one sat in it. The room smelled faintly of something sweet, old perfume, perhaps. Or something masking something else. Clara stepped inside. The rocking slowed, stopped. The temperature plummeted. Daniel's flashlight beam dimmed sharply. And then, on the wall above the crib, something dark began to seep through the wallpaper. At first it looked like dampness. Then it formed letters. Slowly, deliberately. "He is not alone." Clara's breath hitched. Daniel stepped backward. Behind them, the nursery door slammed shut. The hallway lights, though disconnected from power, flickered violently. And from somewhere inside the walls came a whisper. Layered, overlapping. Dozens of voices speaking at once, too soft to distinguish, yet loud enough to vibrate through bone. Clara grabbed Daniel's arm. "This house isn't empty." The whispering grew stronger, closer, as if pressing inward from every surface. The rocking chair began to move again, only faster, and in the reflection of the darkened window, Daniel saw it. A small shape standing behind them, child-sized, featureless, watching. When he turned around, nothing was there. But the breathing returned, right beside his ear, slow, patient, waiting, fan high. The breathing did not fade this time. It remained steady, just inches from Daniel's ear, though nothing stood beside him. He felt the cold of it against his skin, not wind, not air movement, but something that carried intention. Clara's grip tightened. "Don't turn around," she whispered. He wasn't sure whether she meant it as advice or fear. The letters on the wall darkened, bleeding downward like ink mixed with water. "He is not alone." The rocking chair slowed again. Then stopped completely. Silence fell so abruptly that Daniel's ears rang. A soft tapping broke it. 3 knocks. From inside the wall behind the crib. Not random, measured, waiting for a response. Clara shook her head slowly. "It wants acknowledgement." Another 3 knocks. Closer this time. Daniel felt the floor vibrate faintly beneath his shoes. The whispering began again, but this time it carried rhythm, a low murmur rising and falling like breath shared among many. The temperature dropped further. Daniel exhaled, and his breath fogged visibly in the air. The nursery door handle rattled. Not from outside, from inside the room with them. As though something else now stood on the other side trying to get in. Clara's eyes widened. "That's not possible." The handle turned slowly, stopped halfway. A child's laugh echoed softly from the hallway beyond the door. High, brief, gone. Daniel's pulse pounded in his throat. The tapping resumed, but now it came from everywhere: walls, ceiling, floor, an irregular pattern spreading outward like something testing boundaries. Clara stepped toward the crib. "Don't," Daniel hissed. She ignored him. Inside the crib, carved into the wood from the inside out, were shallow scratches. Not chaotic, not frantic, repetitive, vertical lines counted in clusters. Days, weeks, or something else entirely. The whispering shifted tone. It grew urgent. The letters on the wall began to change. The last word dissolved first. Alone faded, reformed. "Listen." He is not listening. Daniel's stomach twisted. The breathing returned to his ear. Closer, slower. And then, for the first time, it spoke clearly. Daniel. His name slid through the air like a blade. Clara heard it too, her face drained of color. From the hallway came the faint outline of a small figure. Not fully solid, not fully shadow. A boy-shaped silhouette standing just beyond the threshold. It did not move. It did not blink. It simply stood, Watching. The whispering inside the walls sharpened, higher, layered, almost panicked. The silhouette tilted its head slightly. Then it took one step backward into the hallway. The nursery door burst open. The hallway stretched longer than before, impossibly elongated, shadows pooling thick at its center. The child-shaped figure retreated another step. The whispering rose to a near scream. Daniel understood something without knowing how. The thing in the walls was not the child. It was what had found him. And it did not want him to leave. The silhouette flickered, dimmed, as darkness spilled from the nursery ceiling like smoke, crawling toward the hallway. Clara pulled Daniel toward the door. Now, they ran. The hallway seemed to bend around them, narrowing and widening unpredictably. The staircase appeared farther away than it should have been. Behind them, the whispering surged forward like a wave. Daniel didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel it following. Halfway down the stairs, the house erupted, doors slamming, glass rattling, the entire structure groaning under unseen weight. They stumbled into the living room. The front door slammed shut on its own. All the windows flared white with sudden light. And for a brief, unbearable second, Daniel saw shapes behind the glass. Many shapes. Watching from inside, then darkness swallowed the house once more. The front door creaked open slowly. Inviting. Outside, the sky finally split with thunder. Rain began to fall. Slow, heavy, deliberate. From the upstairs window, faintly visible through the storm, the child-shaped silhouette stood again. But this time, it was no longer alone. Something taller stood behind it. Breathing. Waiting. The rain did not sound like rain. It struck the roof in uneven patterns, too spaced out, too deliberate, as if each drop were placed instead of falling. Daniel stood in the yard, soaked within seconds, yet unable to pull his eyes away from the upstairs window. The child-shaped silhouette remained there. Still, unmoving. Behind it, the taller shape shifted slightly, though not in any way that resembled a human posture. It seemed elongated, as if its limbs did not bend where they should. Lightning flashed. For a fraction of a second, the window was empty. Then darkness again. Clara grabbed Daniel's arm. "We can't leave like this." He tore his gaze away from the house. "Are you insane? We have to go. If we go now, it follows." The certainty in her voice chilled him more than the rain. A low vibration rolled through the ground beneath their feet. Subtle, deep, not thunder, something closer. The front door of the Whitmore house began to move. Not swinging, breathing, opening slightly, closing, opening again, as if the house itself inhaled and exhaled. Daniel stepped backward. The vibration strengthened. Gravel at their feet trembled. The truck's alarm suddenly blared once, short and sharp, before cutting off by itself. Inside the house, a light flickered on. Then another. Room by room, illumination bloomed behind the windows though no electricity fed the building. Shapes moved across those lit rooms. Slow. Many. Clara lifted her camera with shaking hands. "This is proof," she whispered. But as she aimed the lens, every light went out simultaneously. Black. Total. The rain stopped. Not gradually. Instantly. The forest surrounding Black Hollow returned to complete silence. Daniel became aware of something else. Footprints forming in the mud between them and the house. Small. Bare. One appearing after another. Moving toward them. There was no body attached to them. Just impressions sinking into wet soil. Clara stumbled backward. It came out. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. The footprints stopped several feet away. Close enough that he could imagine a child standing there, staring up at them. The air grew heavy again. That same pressure in his ears from when they first entered town returned, stronger now. Then, softly, directly in front of him. "Don't go." It was not layered this time. Not distorted. It was a child's voice. Clear. Lonely. Clara's breath hitched. "He doesn't want us to leave." Daniel's eyes stayed locked on the empty space above the footprints. Or something doesn't. The temperature plummeted sharply. Frost formed along the truck's windshield in seconds despite the warm season. Behind them, the main street of Black Hollow flickered. Lights appeared in distant buildings. Dim yellow glows behind dusty windows. A door creaked open down the road. Another. Slow figures stepped into view between the structures. Not fully visible, just outlines shifting in places that had been empty moments before. The town was filling. The voice came again, closer now. It gets angry. Daniel swallowed. Who does? The wind picked up without warning, though no trees swayed. The footprints moved again, circling them. Slowly, the taller presence made itself known next. Not visually at first, but through shadow. The ground behind Clara darkened unnaturally, stretching toward her feet even though no light source cast it. Daniel saw it creeping up behind her. Clara. She turned too late. The shadow rose from the ground like smoke solidifying, towering over her. No face, no features, just density. The child's footprints retreated suddenly, scattering backward toward the house. The air filled with whispering again, frantic, layered, angry. The tall shadow leaned closer to Clara. Her breath fogged violently. Daniel. He lunged forward and grabbed her arm, yanking her sideways as the shadow collapsed downward where she had stood. The ground blackened momentarily. The whispering surged into a shriek. Windows throughout town shattered simultaneously. Glass rained down from buildings that had stood untouched for decades. The house on the hill pulsed once with pale light. The child's voice cried out, not in fear, but in warning. Run. Daniel didn't hesitate this time. He dragged Clara toward the truck. The driver's side door refused to open at first, handle frozen solid despite no visible ice. The whispering raced across the ground behind them like wind through tall grass. Clara screamed as something invisible brushed her leg. Daniel slammed his shoulder into the door. It gave way. They tumbled inside. The engine struggled when he turned the key. Once, twice. On the third attempt, it roared to life. Every light in Black Hollow flared at once, brighter than before. The town no longer looked abandoned. Figures stood in every doorway, on every porch, at every window, watching. The tall shadow now stood in front of the Whitmore house, stretching impossibly high, almost touching the roofline. And beside it, small and pale against the darkness, stood the child-shaped figure. Not facing them, facing the taller shape, as if standing in defiance. The truck's headlights flickered. Daniel slammed his foot on the accelerator. The tires spun in mud for a split second before catching. As they sped down the narrow road out of town, Daniel glanced once in the rearview mirror. The child stood alone now in the middle of the road. The taller shadow gone. The town dark again. The boy raised one arm slowly. Not waving, reaching. Then the trees swallowed Black Hollow whole. The pressure in Daniel's ears released instantly. Birds began to chirp somewhere in the forest. The rain resumed, natural this time. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Clara finally broke the silence. It didn't follow. Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. You don't know that. Behind them, miles away and unseen, in the upstairs nursery of the Whitmore house, the rocking chair began to move again. Back and forth, slow, patient, as if waiting for something to return. They did not speak about returning. Not that night, not the next morning. They drove until Black Hollow was nothing more than a name on an aging map, until cell service returned and traffic lights reappeared and the world felt ordinary again. But ordinary felt wrong. Daniel noticed it first in the silence between them. Clara noticed it in the recordings. 3 days later, inside their small apartment miles away from the forest, Clara sat hunched over her laptop replaying audio from the nursery. Daniel stood in the kitchen pretending to make coffee he had no intention of drinking. Static filled the speakers. Then the faint sound of the rocking chair. Then their own breathing. Clara fast-forwarded. The moment the letters formed on the wall. The whispering layered in like wind moving through leaves. And then, she froze. Daniel. He stepped closer. She rewound 10 seconds and played it again. Beneath the whispering. Beneath the knocks. Clearer now in the quiet of their apartment. A second voice. Not the child. Not the layered chorus. Older. Calm. Measured. He brought them. Daniel felt his throat tighten. That wasn't there before. Clara shook her head slowly. It was. We just didn't hear it. She isolated the frequency. Raised the gain. The voice became sharper. He brought them back. A chill crept along Daniel's spine. He repeated. Clara's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Margaret had a husband. Daniel blinked. There's no record of him. Exactly. They dug through town archives online. Newspaper clippings. Census data. Property records. Margaret Whitmore was listed as widowed when she purchased the house. No death certificate. No obituary. No mention of a body. Only absence. Clara leaned back slowly. What if it wasn't just her and the boy in that house? Daniel's mind returned unwillingly to the taller shadow. The way it had moved. The way it had leaned over Clara. That was not the child. That was something else entirely. He rubbed his temples. We left. Clara looked at him. Did we? The apartment lights flickered once. Both of them noticed. Neither commented. Clara opened another audio file. One recorded outside the house after they ran. Rain hitting the porch. Their hurried breathing. Then, footsteps in mud. Small. Approaching. And beneath that, so faint it was almost lost. A third sound. A dragging movement. Slow. Heavy. Daniel's pulse quickened. Clara rewound again. This time, she slowed the playback. The dragging sound became clearer. Like something large shifting across wood. Or something being pulled. From the distance of the recording came the child's voice. It gets angry. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. He remembered that moment. The footprints. The warning. Clara minimized the audio and opened scanned documents she had found in a regional archive. A psychiatric evaluation. Margaret Whitmore. The document described insomnia, paranoia, auditory hallucinations. She claimed her husband never left. She claimed he moved inside the walls. She claimed he was stretching. Daniel felt his stomach turn. The psychiatrist's final note read, subject shows fixation on spatial distortion. Repeats phrase, he doesn't fit anymore. Clara whispered, he doesn't fit. Daniel looked around the apartment. Everything looked normal. Walls straight. Ceiling level. No shadows bending unnaturally. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen had entered with them that night. A soft creak came from the hallway. Both of them froze. It was subtle, but unmistakable, like a footstep on old wood. Daniel swallowed. We don't have wooden floors. Another creak. Closer this time. Clara stood slowly. Daniel. He turned toward the hallway. The light there flickered once. Then steadied. Nothing visible. But the air felt heavier. Thicker. The same pressure he had felt entering Black Hollow pressed faintly against his ears. Daniel stepped cautiously toward the hallway. Each movement felt deliberate, as if something watched and measured it. He reached the doorway. The hallway was empty. Still. Then he noticed it. The wall at the far end. It looked longer. Not dramatically. Just slightly off. As if the space extended a few inches farther than it should. He blinked. It returned to normal. Clara exhaled shakily behind him. Tell me you saw that. He nodded once. From somewhere inside the wall came a faint tapping. 3 knocks. Soft. Measured. Clara's face drained of color. Daniel stepped back. The tapping moved. Along the inside of the wall. Traveling slowly toward them. Not random. Purposeful. A low whisper followed it. Not layered this time. Just one voice. Calm. Measured. He brought you back. The lights in the apartment dimmed sharply. Daniel felt the air grow cold around his ankles. He looked down. A shadow stretched there. Longer than his own. Bending at an unnatural angle. Clara grabbed his arm. It didn't stay in Black Hollow. The tapping stopped directly behind the wall beside them. Silence. Then, a slow scraping sound, as if something inside the wall were turning. Trying to orient itself. Daniel felt something brush lightly against his back. Not touching. Passing through. He spun around. Nothing there. But the hallway light flickered again. And on the painted wall behind Clara, faint discoloration began to spread. Not dark like mold, not wet like water, just a subtle shift in shade. Forming lines, letters, slowly, deliberately. You left him. Clara stepped away from the wall. The letters deepened. The temperature dropped further. Daniel's breath fogged in the narrow space. The whisper came again. Closer. He doesn't fit. A loud crack echoed from somewhere inside the apartment. Not wood, not glass. Something structural. Clara's eyes widened. It's stretching. The wall at the end of the hallway bowed outward. Just slightly. But enough. As if something large pressed against it from inside. The paint splintered. A faint outline appeared beneath the surface. Tall, misshapen, unfolding. Daniel grabbed Clara and pulled her back toward the living room. The tapping resumed, faster now, from multiple directions. Inside every wall, above the ceiling, beneath the floor, the apartment lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed the space, and in that darkness, Daniel heard it clearly. A slow inhale, followed by a patient exhale. Right beside him, not in Black Hollow, not in the Whitmore house, but here, with them, waiting. Darkness did not fall over the apartment. It pressed inward. Daniel could feel it, thick and close against his face, as if the air itself had weight. Clara's hand clutched his sleeve so tightly her nails dug through the fabric. Neither of them moved. The breathing beside him was steady, measured, not rushed, not hunting, waiting. Somewhere inside the walls, the tapping resumed, slower now, almost thoughtful. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 knocks again. The pattern felt deliberate. A signal. The lights flickered once, then came back on, dimmer than before. The hallway wall that had bowed outward now appeared flat again, smooth and unbroken. The painted surface showed no cracks, no bulges, no letters, but the temperature remained wrong. Too cold. Daniel swallowed carefully. We're not imagining this. Clara shook her head. She looked smaller somehow, like the room had grown larger around her. We left him there, she whispered. Daniel knew who she meant. The child, standing in the road, reaching. He had seen that gesture replay in his dreams every night since. The apartment ceiling creaked. A slow, dragging sound crossed above them. Heavy, measured, like something adjusting its weight. Clara's eyes lifted slowly toward the ceiling. It followed us, she said. No, Daniel replied automatically. But the word lacked conviction. The dragging sound stopped directly overhead. Silence pressed down. Then, a soft impact, as if 2 hands had planted themselves flat against the ceiling. The dry wall dented inward slightly. Not breaking, just bending. Daniel felt his pulse hammering in his ears. The dent deepened, slowly, as if something above were leaning down, testing the barrier. Clara stepped backward. The ceiling gave a faint cracking sound. And then it stopped. The pressure lifted. The ceiling smoothed itself gradually, returning to normal as though nothing had touched it. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise. Daniel forced himself to breathe slowly. It wants something. Clara nodded. It said we left him. The memory snapped into place. The child's voice in the rain. It gets angry. Daniel's chest tightened. What if the child isn't trapped in that house? Clara looked at him carefully. What do you mean? What if he's trapped with it? The apartment lights flickered again. The hallway seemed longer than it should. Subtle, but wrong. Daniel walked toward it cautiously. Each step felt like moving through water. The air pressure returned to his ears. Halfway down the hall, he noticed something new. The wall at the far end wasn't painted the same color anymore. It was darker, as if aged, weathered. He blinked. The paint peeled slightly at the corners. Clara stepped beside him. This isn't our hallway. The floorboards beneath them creaked. But their apartment didn't have floorboards. Daniel reached out slowly and touched the wall. The surface was rough. Wood. Old. Cold. The smell hit them next. That faint sweetness. Perfume. Old and faded. They weren't in their apartment anymore. Not fully. The hallway stretched longer with each breath. The ceiling rose higher. The air grew colder. At the far end, a door appeared. Slightly open. Daniel felt dread settle heavily in his stomach. The nursery door. Clara's voice trembled. We didn't go back, but the house had come to them. A soft child's voice drifted from behind the door. You shouldn't have left. Daniel took a step forward before he could stop himself. Clara grabbed his arm. Don't. The whispering began again, layered and restless, seeping from the walls around them. The door at the end of the hall creaked open wider. Inside was darkness. Not empty darkness. Depth. The breathing echoed from within. Slower now. Satisfied. The hallway walls began to stretch outward, widening unnaturally as if making space. The child stepped into view. Not shadow this time. Not fully solid either. Pale. Translucent. Eyes dark and hollow. He looked the same age Daniel remembered from the town records. Small. Thin. But his expression held something older. You left me, the child said softly. Daniel's throat tightened. We didn't know. The child tilted his head slightly. Behind him, inside the darkness of the nursery, something shifted. A taller outline unfolded slowly. Limbs extending at unnatural angles. The whispering intensified, rising into overlapping murmurs. He doesn't fit, the voices breathed. The tall shape leaned closer behind the child. Too close. As if attached. Daniel understood. The child wasn't separate from it. He was bound to it. Anchored. The boy's voice dropped lower. It wants to come through. The hallway ceiling bent upward again. The walls pulsed gently. Clara whispered, through what? The child's gaze moved to Daniel. Through you. The air vanished from Daniel's lungs. The taller shape behind the child stretched further, its outline scraping against the edges of the doorway as if constrained by invisible limits. The whispering grew frantic. The walls trembled. The ceiling cracked faintly. The apartment, or what had once been their apartment, no longer felt stable. Daniel felt something brush against his chest. Cold. Not touching skin. Touching something deeper. His shadow on the wall began to move independently. Stretching upward. Thinning. Reaching toward the nursery door. Clara screamed his name. The child's expression changed. Fear. Real fear. It's opening, he whispered. The tall shape pressed forward. The doorway splintered slightly at the frame. The walls split with thin hairline cracks. Daniel felt his vision blur. The breathing grew louder. Right inside his head now. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. The child suddenly stepped forward. Between Daniel and the doorway. The taller shape recoiled slightly behind him. The whispering turned furious. You have to bring me back, the child said quickly. Back where? Clara cried. To the place before. Daniel's mind raced. The house? The child shook his head. Before the house. The hallway shuddered violently. Plaster rained down from above. The tall shape forced one elongated limb through the doorway, scraping against the ceiling. Reality seemed to thin around them. Daniel grabbed Clara's hand. What does that mean? He shouted. The child looked at him with hollow eyes. Where he first stretched, the apartment walls split wider. The nursery doorway widened unnaturally. The tall shape began unfolding fully into the hallway. Daniel felt something pulling at him from behind, his own shadow detaching, tugging toward the darkness. The child's voice trembled. Hurry. The lights exploded into white. Sound collapsed inward, and everything went silent. When Daniel could see again, he was standing in complete darkness. Not the apartment, not the Whitmore house. Cold earth beneath his feet. The smell of wet pine. And in the distance, faintly visible through the trees, a clearing. Black hollow. But older. Smaller. Unfinished. Beside him, Clara stood shaking. And ahead of them, near the edge of the clearing, a man-shaped figure stood alone. Human. Solid. Back turned. Watching something in the ground. The child's voice echoed faintly behind them. This is where he began. The forest felt younger. That was the first thing Daniel understood as he stared at the clearing ahead. The trees were thinner, spaced wider apart. The air smelled raw, damp, untouched by the decades that had shaped Black Hollow into the dead town they had walked through. No houses stood on the hill. No main street. No Whitmore home. Only a shallow depression in the earth at the center of the clearing. And the man. He stood at its edge, shoulders slightly hunched, as if studying something below him. His clothes were old-fashioned but intact, suspenders, work boots, a pale shirt rolled at the sleeves. He looked real, solid, alive. Clara's voice trembled. Is that? Daniel nodded slowly. Margaret's husband. The man knelt down at the edge of the depression. Daniel stepped closer cautiously. The ground beneath his feet felt firm and natural, not warped like the spaces they had just fled. The man spoke, but not to them. I can hear you, he murmured softly. His voice was gentle, curious, not afraid. From inside the shallow pit came a faint tapping sound. 3 knocks. Measured. Daniel felt his stomach twist. The man leaned closer, almost smiling. It's all right, he whispered into the earth. I won't leave you alone. Clara sucked in a sharp breath. Daniel understood suddenly. This was the beginning, not a haunting, an invitation. The man extended his hand into the depression. The soil shifted slightly, sinking inward as though hollow beneath. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then the earth inside the depression darkened unnaturally. Not shadow. Depth. The air pressure changed. Daniel's ears rang faintly. The man's smile faded. The ground inside the pit stretched downward impossibly far, like the surface had become thin skin over something vast. A slow inhale rose from below. Deep. Ancient. The man stiffened. He tried to pull his hand back, but it did not come free. His arm sank slowly past the wrist, past the elbow. He gasped, not in pain, in confusion. Clara grabbed Daniel's arm. We're not supposed to just watch. But they couldn't move. The scene felt fixed in place, like a memory replaying without their ability to alter it. The man struggled now. His arm pulled farther downward as if something beneath had taken hold. The soil around the depression did not collapse. It held its shape, as though stretched. The man's expression changed. Real fear now. He braced his other hand against the ground, trying to pull himself free. The inhale from below deepened. Satisfied, the man screamed as his body jerked forward violently. His shoulders disappeared beneath the surface without disturbing the earth, as though he had been folded into something too small to contain him. His legs kicked once, twice, then were dragged down silently. The depression remained, shallow, unchanged, still. Clara covered her mouth. Daniel felt cold sweat along his spine. From the empty clearing came a faint whisper. He doesn't fit. The ground trembled subtly. The depression widened slightly, not collapsing outward, stretching inward, as if something below was trying to unfold. The forest darkened. Clouds rolled in overhead unnaturally fast. And from the tree line, a small figure stepped forward. The child, but younger, solid, alive. He looked toward the depression, toward where his father had vanished. Dad? He called softly. No answer. The ground inside the pit shifted again. A shape pressed upward from beneath, not breaking through, just pushing against the thin barrier of soil. Too large, limbs elongated beneath the surface, distorting the earth like fabric stretched over a moving body. The child stepped closer. Daniel wanted to shout, to warn him, but no sound left his throat. The earth split slightly, and a hand emerged, not the man's hand, longer, jointed wrong. The fingers bent backward as they gripped the edge of the depression. The child froze. The hand withdrew, slowly, patiently, as if reconsidering. The whisper drifted through the clearing. I won't leave you alone. But it was no longer the man's voice. It layered, multiplied. Daniel felt understanding crash into him. It had needed an opening. The man had offered himself willingly. And once inside something smaller than its true form, it began stretching. Testing space. Learning limits. The child backed away slowly. The depression sealed over as if untouched. Moments later, Margaret appeared at the edge of the clearing, calling for her husband. She saw only her son standing alone. The forest shifted. Time accelerated. Houses rose in blurred motion. The town formed around the clearing. The Whitmore house built directly over the place where the earth had thinned. Daniel felt the weight of inevitability. They had not witnessed an accident. They had seen a door opened. The scene slowed again. The child, now older, standing in the nursery, whispering at the walls, listening to tapping from inside them. "He's still here," the boy murmured. The walls bowed subtly. The ceiling stretched. "He doesn't fit anymore," Margaret whispered from the doorway, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. The tall shadow began forming faintly behind the child. Unfolding. Daniel felt the present creeping back in around them. The clearing faded. The house walls returned. The nursery doorway reappeared, the tall shape now fully visible behind the boy. Not memory, not replay. Present. It had brought them here to understand. The child turned slowly toward Daniel. "You have to close it." "How?" Daniel asked hoarsely. The tall shape leaned down, towering over them. The whispering roared. "Where it opened," the child said. The ground beneath Daniel's feet cracked. The clearing flashed back into existence for a split second. The shallow depression visible once more. "That place still exists," Clara breathed. The tall shape lunged forward. The world snapped violently back into motion. Daniel and Clara stood again in their darkened apartment hallway. The walls split wide. The nursery doorway stretched open at the end. The tall shadow unfolding fully now, no longer constrained. The child stood between them and it. Fading. "You have to go back," the boy whispered. The shadow's elongated arm shot forward, brushing Daniel's chest. His breath left him instantly. Cold flooded his body. The walls screamed as they bent outward. The apartment ceiling tore slightly. The shadow began pouring into the hallway completely. It was almost free. Daniel grabbed Clara's hand. "We go back to the clearing." The child nodded faintly, and as the tall shape leaned down over them, as the whispering reached a deafening crescendo, the hallway split apart like paper. And the forest swallowed them whole once more. This time, not as observers, but as participants. The clearing waited. The depression in the earth darker than before. Breathing. The clearing did not feel like memory anymore. It felt awake. Daniel landed hard on damp earth, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. Clara fell beside him, coughing, scrambling upright. The forest around them stood unnaturally still, as if holding its breath. At the center of the clearing, the shallow depression pulsed. Not visibly rising and falling, but breathing. The air above it shimmered faintly, like heat distortion, though the temperature was freezing. Behind them, something tore through the trees. Branches snapped. Wood splintered. The tall shape was coming. Daniel didn't need to turn around to know. Clara pulled herself to her feet. This is where it opened. The depression darkened further, soil thinning into something like stretched skin. Faint tapping echoed from beneath. 3 knocks. Waiting. Daniel stepped closer despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "It needs permission," he said quietly. Clara looked at him. The husband gave it that. Daniel nodded. He answered it. The ground beneath the depression rippled slightly. The whispering began again, layered and restless, drifting up from below like breath through a crack. "You brought it here," the voices murmured. Daniel clenched his jaw. "No." The tall shadow burst through the tree line behind them. It no longer resembled anything human. Its limbs extended too far, bending where joints should not exist. Its surface shifted constantly, like darkness struggling to hold shape. Its height seemed to change with every blink, sometimes towering over the trees, sometimes compressing inward unnaturally. The forest recoiled from it. Leaves shriveled, branches bowed. Clara stepped backward toward Daniel. "It followed us because it needs space." The shadow lunged forward but stopped abruptly at the edge of the clearing. As if an invisible boundary held it. Its elongated form pressed against the air, testing resistance. The depression pulsed brighter. Daniel understood. "This place is the doorway," he whispered. "Not the house." The child appeared then, standing at the opposite edge of the clearing. Not translucent this time, not fading, solid, quiet, watching the tall shape with hollow eyes. It stretches where it's allowed, the boy said softly. The shadow reacted violently at the sound of his voice. It recoiled, then lashed outward, scraping invisible claws against the barrier around the clearing. The whispering turned furious. He left me. Daniel stepped closer to the depression. The air above it felt thin, like standing near a cliff's edge. It only came through because he answered, Daniel said. The child nodded once. Clara's voice trembled, so we don't answer. The tapping from below grew louder. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Daniel knelt at the edge of the depression. The darkness beneath felt endless. Cold. Patient. It wanted acknowledgement. Wanted invitation. The tall shadow slammed itself against the boundary again. The trees shook violently. The barrier flickered. Daniel raised his voice, steady despite the fear tightening his chest. I hear you. The tapping stopped instantly. Clara's eyes widened. Daniel. He didn't look at her. But you are not welcome. Silence fell across the clearing. Even the wind died. The tall shadow froze mid-motion. The darkness beneath the depression shifted. A low inhale rose from below. Deeper than before. Angrier. You cannot close what is open, the layered voices murmured. Daniel felt the pull against his chest again, the same cold pressure that had tried to stretch through him. He stood firm. It was opened by mistake. The child stepped closer to him. It needs someone to stay, the boy whispered. Daniel understood instantly. The husband had answered, had reached in, had allowed himself to become the anchor. The shadow had stretched through him. Clara shook her head as realization hit her. No. The tall shape began pressing harder against the barrier. Cracks of darkness spread across the air around the clearing like fractures in glass. The depression widened slightly, the boundary weakening. The child looked at Daniel quietly. If no one answers, it cannot stay. Daniel's pulse slowed, clarity settling over him in a strange calm. It needs permission to exist here. Clara grabbed his arm. We leave, now. Daniel shook his head gently. If we leave, it follows again. The tall shadow roared without sound, its form expanding violently against the barrier. The clearing trembled. Daniel stepped forward, closer to the depression. The cold intensified, biting into his bones. He looked at the child. You don't belong to it. The boy's hollow eyes flickered. I stayed so it wouldn't leave. Daniel nodded slowly. You don't have to anymore. The whispering beneath the earth rose sharply. No. The ground split slightly. A distorted hand began pushing upward through the thin soil. Long. Jointed wrong. Reaching. Daniel raised his voice over the rising sound. I revoked the invitation. The hand froze. The tall shadow screamed silently, slamming against the invisible boundary. Cracks spread wider across the air. You were never welcome, Daniel continued firmly. The forest seemed to lean inward. Listening. You were allowed by fear. By curiosity. By loneliness. The child stepped beside him. You don't belong here. The hand beneath the soil began sinking slowly. Resisting. The whispering turned shrill. You cannot close what was opened. Daniel took one final step forward. I do not answer you. Silence. Absolute. The tall shadow stopped moving. The cracks in the air halted mid-spread. The depression trembled violently. Then, the soil collapsed inward, not exploding, not erupting, folding in on itself like fabric being pulled tight. The distorted hand vanished. The darkness beneath compressed rapidly, shrinking into a point no larger than a coin. The tall shadow convulsed, its elongated limbs snapping inward unnaturally. Its form twisted violently, folding in impossible angles. The child grabbed Daniel's hand. Now, the clearing imploded in silence. Light flashed white. Sound vanished. Daniel felt weightlessness for a brief, disorienting second. Then, he was lying on the floor of his apartment. Clara gasped beside him. The lights were steady. The hallway normal. Walls straight. No cracks. No stretching. No whispering. The air felt warm. Alive. They lay there breathing hard. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. No tapping. No dragging. No pressure in their ears. Clara slowly sat up. It's gone, she whispered. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the hallway. It remained still. He stood cautiously and walked toward it. Each step normal. Ground solid. He reached the wall that had once bowed outward. Flat. Smooth. Empty. Behind him, Clara let out a shaky breath that turned into quiet laughter of relief. Days passed. No disturbances. No recordings captured stray voices. No shadows moved unnaturally. Black Hollow, when they searched for it on maps again, appeared abandoned as before. But the Whitmore house had partially collapsed according to satellite images. The hill overgrown, the clearing beneath it barely visible, and there were no reports of missing persons. No tapping in walls, no stretching spaces. Sometimes, late at night, Daniel would wake suddenly. Not from fear, from habit, listening, but there was only silence. True silence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel stood by the apartment window watching the sky darken. For a moment, just as light and shadow met, he thought he saw a small figure reflected behind him. Still, quiet, watching, he did not turn around. He did not answer, and the reflection faded with the light. Some doors open because someone knocks. Some stay open because someone answers. And some close forever when no one does.